everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cosmic Conversations. I'm your host, Marla Martenson, and today we're going to talk something very dear to my heart, and that is writing. As an author of 5 books, a lot of blogs, articles, social media posts, writing's a big part of my life, but I can always improve. And I've got a very special guest today, and her name is Kelly Morgan. She's a writer, a writing coach, and a creative mentor, and I'm just going to let her tell you about herself. Her website is creativelife.com. Hello and welcome, Kelly.
Hey, Marla. It's good to see you. Yes. We'll do a dance today.
That's right. The writing dance.
Yeah.
We had that strawberry full moon the last couple of nights, which was so amazing. So I wonder if anybody used that to enhance their creativity. I still got to go grab my crystals that are outside. I put them out under the full moon last night.
Oh, is that cool? I like that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, the magic of writing and what you do, because I know you also teach the artist's way, and you've got a lot of great really a creative, I would say, magical approach to writing.
Yeah, and it was very much influenced by the artist's way, because at the same time I developed a class called improvisational writing, which has become the improvisation way to write for authors and writers, aspiring, experienced, to get out of your head and get into the flow of your writing. So yes, there's craft, and then there's that place that we knew as a little kid where we just knew how to do things. We knew how to connect with, let's call it, the creative intelligence, God, good orderly direction. We didn't think about how to create a little play in our backyard. We just got together with the neighbor kids and started mirroring off my sister. I was the bridesmaid and put on a little play. You know what I'm saying? So
that is such an amazing point, because looking back, I used to do that. I put on a whole variety show with some neighborhood kids, and I choreographed songs. I sang, which I wasn't even a good singer, and I had people come and watch, and I wrote short stories, I wrote poems, and I wasn't even worried that it wasn't good. But now as adults, we're like, oh my God, I who am I to write? How can I, maybe it won't be good, or I don't know how to do it, or we just, we don't go in that flow. So that's what you, in your workshops and stuff, you help people get back into that childlike.
Yeah, Picasso said, it took, the great artist Picasso last century said, and most prolific artist of the century, by the way, said, it took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, who was a great painter of his day, and a lifetime to paint like a child. So he was always aware of how he had to just let go and let the process flow. I want to say it even more. It's been very spiritual for me. You can make it spiritual if you'd like, which is allow and receive. And it's not about you a lot of times, the writing. On the other hand, we need that 4 years like Raphael to learn, how to write. Writing it's like dancing. It's not, we love watching children dance, and that's not enough. And so we need the combination of the two. And the problem with adults is we've gone to school and we took on the teachings of socialization, and we begin to lose sight of that childlike ability, which you're talking about there, which is you could just do it. You weren't worried about the critic.
Right. Yeah. I just thought it was great. And I remember even starting a novel. I wish I still have it. It was called The Spirit in the Jar. And it was there was a spirit there was a jar upstairs in this house, and these kids went up there, and there was a spirit in it. And I was really coming along on it, and I don't know I stopped it, and then I don't know what ever happened to it, but I still think about it. I'm like, I wish I had that now, to look at.
Well, and how interesting, right? I like to have people do an exercise where they look back on things they created when they were young, toys they had. And it's very, I sometimes wonder, and I don't know that much about it, but if we're just born who we are, right. Because spirit in a jar, that is you. And it was like you had to go around the block, around the world, and come back to who you really are through all these learning experiences that you had. And your last book was all about your spiritual journey, the Buddha.
Right. Yes. And as an adult, I just started leaning into that more and more and more, and going into that the spiritual side, which I bring into everything now. But yeah, when I was a kid, I liked all things witches. I liked everything. You know, I'd go get maple leaves. I lived in Seattle, and take them home and then color over them. So you know, you trace it, and just all these creative things. And we really need to tap into that as an adult. I think we do. Shut down. We compare ourselves on social media, or you see, oh, that person's a best-selling author, or I couldn't, you know, do that. But I always say, hey, everybody, if you want to write a book, write a book. You should write a book. But you do need some structure and some help and some editing if you're going to put it out there. You don't just want to I wouldn't put my third grade book out there, you know, like that.
Or who knows? My niece, I always tell the story when I do a webinar. My niece wrote some amazing poetry. And yeah, it was young. She was 5. And there was one story about the worm in the apple. And the worm loved apples and made it his home. And the fox loved to eat apples. And it was all painted. And I thought, how amazing. She's 5. She has tension. She understood how to put together a story. So we're worried about what's going to happen to the little worm.
Right.
She built character. I'm just saying she did it like a 5-year-old. But then, yeah, I was talking to my niece on the phone. This was 5 years later. And I said, Caitlin, are you still writing? And she giggled and she said, oh, no, Aunt Kelly, I'm not a writer. And so just a few years of school had taught her that some of us have talents in one place and talents in another, and we shouldn't cross over those lines. And yet she wrote beautifully. She wrote poetry. She wrote things that I would have loved to have written when I was older. And yeah, so what I say to people, it's about this and that. It's about craft. Mm-hmm. And then that's why experienced writers come to me, because they lose the reason they wanted to write in the first place. They get burned out. They do things for other people all the time, especially people are writing for others. And so then this part, the child part, that's the wonder and the imagination and all of that, which is, I believe, we can actually become, let's say, a secretary or a conduit for this intelligence that's greater than our egos. Right. In other words, we don't have to just write with our small selves. We can write with more.
Yeah, like channeling things coming through. I'm reading a book called Apollo and Me right now. And I just interviewed the author, Kate. I'm blank with the C. I'm blanking on her last name, but she actually had a vision of Apollo, the Greek god, that came to her. But she's done a lot of spiritual work. I mean, you know, hours and hours and hours of meditation and plant medicines and all this kind of stuff. But she had this vision, and then she ended up writing this beautiful novel that was really like channeled through her, all about Apollo, the Greek god. And it's an amazing book. I interviewed her for my podcast last week. My podcast, you guys, The Mystical Matchmaker, so you can go on iTunes and look that up. I'll put a link actually to the podcast in the show notes. But yeah, and so we kind of can open up to that, our higher selves or the angels or whatever, and get some things downloaded.
Yeah, and let's be real practical. Just, it's a very competitive market out there.
Yes, I wanted to bring that up.
Yes, and when how we met, which I was reading Diary of a Beverly Hills Matchmaker, it felt channeled. And I don't mean in some woo-woo way, although I'm glad this is that kind of channel, but it just felt like, and of course it had been edited, of course it had craft, but it just felt like there was an energy to it. You were reliving it. I felt it. And I felt things for you. And so I believe, and this would be interesting for you to talk about actually, is I believe that some of that came about because you were just tapped in to, flow. You were getting in the flow, and you were writing things that were happening to you, and you were gaining a higher perspective on them. Is that the case, or I don't know?
I don't. Well, I mean, I think it's cool that you feel like it was channeled, but it was just really things that were when I decided to write the book. My friend Julie my friend, she's a celebrity ghostwriter, and she's actually mentioned in I think all three of my books. I know in Hearts on the Line she's in that book, maybe not in the first, and then
Definitely in the voodoo one.
she's in there, and she suggested that I do it, and since people are always so fascinated by my job, I just started to look at the most interesting and outrageous parts of my life with my Latin husband, who's can be kind of overbearing sometimes, and he's got his, and we're like Ricky and Lucy, and then the job part, and I just started picking out those parts because we all have these scenarios in our lives that, like, you wanted, like, Kelly, I got to tell you what just happened, or can you believe what this, I was trying to get to work, and the heel broke on my shoe, I fell down, I was sitting next to a Rolls Royce, nobody would help pick me up, and then the whole day went from there. And so there's things that you can that I would just pull out that would happen. And I guess, I don't know, but luckily a lot of goofy things were happening to me back then.
But I would call that flow. You were able to get in the present moment. Yeah. You were able to record what was happening. And I always say we're out of flow when our critic wins out, when we start hearing the voices of our critic and pay attention, and then either don't write or we write and we won't put it out there for people to see, because the head is very left brain, it's much more critical. Yeah. Whereas you feel in the flow, to me, whether or not you feel like you were, because there's not and I don't know you, so you could have been doing this, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of pretense or a lot of ego posturing. And so when I say getting in the flow is a really practical thing, I just mean it's not like you're channeling the whole book and you don't need to edit and all of that. I just mean there are times where time passes, you forget what time it is, you forget that you're writing, things go very smoothly, you're like, oh God, I didn't know that happened. I'll have people read stuff out loud in my class and they're like, oh, I thought that was awful. And then people are laughing and they're loving that part of it. They don't even know because that they're doing it because you just forget yourself. That's it. It's a self-forgetting.
Yeah.
And weirdly, because you're writing about yourself.
I know. And it's, some of these things that, so I was working in an office at the time with other people, a matchmaking service. And there are things that I think, like reading these books, going back, reading them. So for people who don't like their jobs or it's kind of mundane, I'm going to this job every day. There are funny things that happen in the office. There's a different way you can look at it. Maybe you want to journal about it. Just kind of, I think you guys, if anybody is working in an office and you really don't like your job, and not that I hated my job or anything, but there were things that I didn't like about it. But I think my book, Diary of a Beverly Hills Matchmaker, will help you with looking at your job a different way, even the little negative things, because when I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of like to bring out the everyday things that you can look at in a different perspective too.
Yeah, I'm like, I just happen to like that kind of writing where it's very accessible and the everyday things. And, speaking about, I was in that position too, where I hated my job, and it was me journaling every day that helped me change my career. I think I just started listening to myself more. There became a self-trust, and writing took me there. And I didn't publish all of that. It wasn't necessarily as interesting as what you're doing. But I did start writing poetry, and I did start doing performance art and that kind of thing. And it led me there. And through that, I learned, who is Kelly? What do I want? What do I really want? Do I want to stay in advertising, or do I want to what? The idea that I became someone who taught the artist way for 20 years in Hollywood and now teach the improvisation way was not on the horizon.
Right.
I attribute where I'm now to simply beginning to receive the messages that I was sending myself, other than the message, I hate this damn job.
Right.
Let me get rid of it, to, wow, well, what could I do? And I remember I called someone who was teaching the Artist's Way in Chicago that I knew, and I asked her about it. And this was 5 years before I changed my job. It's like, well, it's not like things bubble up and we don't listen to them. We go, oh no, that's not possible.
Right. Well, there was a writer that inspired me a lot. If anybody knows Jen Lancaster, Bitter is the New Black, she had that book in the early 2000s that she's one of those writers that her first book took off and it was great. But what happened was she lost her job. She was in corporate or something, had a big job and always buying, the most expensive purses and all of this stuff in Chicago. And she lost that job. I don't know what happened, if the market crashed or what happened at that time when she lost it. And then she was doing all these little part-time jobs, like getting coffee for somebody else in an office and stuff. And she started to blog about it. She started a blog about her search for work and what she was going through. And she's very witty and has this, wry sense of humor. And the blog took off. She really promoted it. She had said I don't know how she did this, but she promoted it somewhere on Craigslist to get people to come to her job and to her blog. Anyway, through her blogging about what she was going through, she ended up getting a book deal or deciding to write this book, Bitter is the New Black, which was great. So that was very inspiring right there. And then years later, it was my friend Julie who told me, hey, because she'd read Jen's books too and said, why don't you write a memoir about because Jen was writing memoir, and why don't you write a memoir about your life? You have even more interesting, crazy life than her. And so it was like, yeah. So I think the next day I started in on it and I had no idea how to write. I had written 2 self-help books, added some of my personal stories in there, of course, but I didn't know what I was doing, but I just launched in on it. So I would say don't let that stop you from expressing yourself. And I'd like to talk about what you said. The market, how many books are coming out every day, every second? Probably people are self-publishing and then books flooded because somebody recently, old friend of mine, he's a very successful businessman. And he says, well, how are your books? Because I said, oh, I'm working on a new book. And he goes, well, how are your books doing? Are they selling? I mean, what's going on? And I hate this question when people say,
hate it too.
Are your books selling? How's your books doing? And I said, you know what? Listen, I said, yes, they're selling on Amazon. I see that there are some sales, but I don't make a living on my books. I've never made a living on it. There's a million books out there. People don't read. What a book does is it establishes us as an expert in our field. It allows us to, help get clients, help get on podcasts and shows your credibility. And that's really what my books have done, plus be a lot of fun. And he's like, oh, okay. And I've made money on men who have hired me because they've read my self-help books or a book. So I've made thousands of dollars from my book, but inadvertently. So people who think they're going to make $1 million or hundreds of $1,000s on book sales, it's very rare. And just like actors, I was an actor for 20 years. Did I make a living at it? No. Some people do, but a very small amount of people do. So I had to wait on tables. So, but those waiting on tables gave good fodder for some stories like my short story Amateur Night, which is all about my waitress days in Chicago on one fateful Valentine's Day. So yeah, speak a little to that, because you give these classes and people are coming to you to help them with their stories. Or do they have this big expectation about, being this, making a lot of money or getting rich quick, or I'm going to write this book and,
Some do and some don't. I think some people come to me because they think they have a good story or they want to heal. So I think and most people that I work with, some write fiction, but many write their own stories to start with. And I think that is healing, because of that perspective thing that you talked about earlier. If you can just shift your perspective and see things from a different way, and writing, that is the greatest thing about writing. And the greatest thing about writing is getting very detailed. You have to remember dialogue and getting in that present moment, not just telling a story, well, this happened and that happened. Who cares? I mean, what really matters is going back in and making scenes out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to answer your question, yeah, and then others too. This is Hollywood. People were always coming in with this expectation of making a lot of money. And even when I work with coaches, they're wanting to make a lot of money on their book, but they do understand, like you, it just builds a platform.
Yes.
I'd say that if there's anything that's missing in our culture, it's the process.
Mm-hmm.
So the way is the journey, the process. And for me, it's got to be both the process and the end result. And we get so focused on that end result. I'm working with someone on her memoir now. I'm a writing coach. And it's just all about, and this is fine. We got to get it done. We got to get this done. We got to do it's very anxious. And so I have to bring her back in. We have to work with the process. And that's the thing. There are so many books out there right now, and many self-published, and I'm all for it. It's just that if you really want to work as a professional, you need to get your book edited.
Yes.
You need to work and make sure that the writing is a compelling story that makes people turn the page and keep going. And that's the craft side of things. So people get into this end result and they forget craft, or they forget flow, one of the two. And it makes for boring read, you know. I mean, it's just a lot of books. I pick them up, business books, and they're just telling a process. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't know you. I'm not going to read this. Or I know you, and I don't see you in this book.
Even with a business book or something, the best ones are the ones where they have stories about what they went through, or, oh, I was, you know, this happened to me. And then you're like, can relate to it instead of just, exactly.
And all kinds of things are business books now, healing books.
Yes.
Any kind of book that's telling a process that you do. It's not about you anymore. It's about, how can I bring this information through in a way that will be of service to you? And that's where I started out this dialogue, which is, how can you let go and let the universe bring in what you need to know? And sometimes there's a lot more you need to know. So for example, as I took my business up online, I worked with a woman who was a copywriter, and I had taken copywriting back in school. I was a marketing journalism major. And I learned a lot of stuff about, I always thought I made it about everyone else. I wasn't. I learned how to do that. I learned how to see, what is it that you want? How is it that you, my clients, potential clients. And then I learned to focus on one group of clients so that others could come in. And I think we need to do the same when we're writing memoir. Writing a book about cancer, well, sure, other people will read it, but people who have cancer or are working with someone, they're gonna want to read your book right now, because it's going to give them hope and inspiration. And your book, which is so cool, I wish I'd read it back when, because even now I can remember back when I was trying to change careers and it didn't feel possible, and I was stuck in a job, and just reading about how you looked at it, and it wasn't a complaining book. It wasn't a victim book. It was a book where, because that's what I work with people with. We start off where we feel like little kids, you know, like things are happening to us. And it wasn't that. It was you, by the end of the book, starting to take some responsibility for things, starting to see things in a new way, really becoming the hero of the book. Yeah. And I think that's critical. So
yeah, you have to go from, there has to be an end where what's the shift, what's the transition, what's the lesson at the end.
Right. And in your first book, it was very much about, it was your own transition or transformation, And it was also about how you helped other people transform their lives and find love when they didn't. And then by your third book, it was more just almost more about your own transformation.
Which
so you can
was,
just see
there was some
progression.
clients in there though too.
Yeah.
And one
Well,
that
you do. It's just the focus is different. And I think both are good.
yeah, one that I snapped at on the phone, I did snap, trying to master. I'm still working on that self-mastery. I'm still working on my reactions, on my, even at my age now, I'm going through a lot of healing, a lot of working with a shaman and everything to work on those reactions. And in my last book, The Buddha Made Me Do It, there was one client that just pushed my buttons. He was rude. Sometimes I'll get a guy who will yell at me on the phone, who will be rude. And I was on a 3-way call with my business partner. I let him have it. I'm like, do you realize that there's a person on the other end of this line when you're yelling or when you're being all snide? Do you realize that, I was crying and he was in shock. But that was where I was at then still with those kind of reactions. And so I'm trying to master that.
And sometimes that's okay. I mean, I noticed he
you gotta
might
let
have
it
gone
rip
away.
sometimes, right?
Well, I think, again, that's process.
Yeah.
That's the journey, I've worked a lot with communication. In my writing circles, we try to repeat back what we've heard because we don't do that in our culture.
Yes, right.
And if you can just hear like what I'm saying about your book or what I took out of it, that gives you a knowing about your book or helps you learn things. I'm speaking about you as anyone. And I can see that by the time you got to that point, or let me say, the way I saw it was by the time you got to that point, that was a very important moment for you. Because instead of hiding what you truly felt, you said it. And then we can learn how to say it better. But we just sometimes have to break through and go, wait a minute, I'm going to be me and I'm going to be abundant. And I am going to let chips fall where they may. And it is all about abundance. And writing is about abundance too. It's about us just letting ourselves be what we are, and yet taking on the craft and being guided by someone outside of ourselves, by our own intuition, not just our ego.
Yes, I love it.
And I know ego can take you far, but I don't think, and my ego has taken me far. My whole early career was ego driven and I did very well. It just I wasn't happy. So go figure.
Right. And also we don't have to, sometimes we'll think, okay, I want to be a writer. And then, but how could do I have to quit my job? Do I have to do this? No, what I did was I did it on the side. Keep your day job. You don't want to feel that pressure. You still got to pay your bills. You maybe have a family. You have to have that money coming in, and then you're going to need that money. Also, put some money on the side to fund your editing. Your maybe like what I did was I enrolled in some book awards. And they cost like $75 or whatever to enter. And I did win for The Buddha Made Me Do It, bronze, second place in, I've got it up on my Independent Publisher Book Awards 2017.
Oh.
The Buddha Made Me Do It. So that's the IPPY. So I've got that. I got the bronze medal winner, New Age, Mind, Body, Spirit. I got the thing up on the wall. So that was great. So now I can say that I'm an award-winning author. So I won that award. All right. Well, awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I love it. And you guys leave a message in the comments. I want to hear from you. Are you writing a book? Have you written a book? What's keeping you stuck? What are your processes? Let us know. And until next time, much love, everybody.
Bye. Yay. Bye.